I read Moby Dick by Herman Melville. I know I've talked about this a couple of times in my recent videos, but I wanted to give it its own dedicated video where I actually sit down and go over my thoughts for it. So my interest first started because of a okay. Hi, cutie. My interest in Moby Dick first started because of, at least as far as I can remember, because of a movie called In the Heart of the Sea, which I watched a few times as a kid. Funnily enough, I didn't realize that was an adaptation of the story that inspired Moby Dick. What? But I did think that it was an adaptation of Moby Dick itself. But even though I was wrong, the movie still put Moby Dick on my radar. The second thing that ended up causing me to want to read Moby Dick was in high school, in my senior year. We played this song that is based off of the book. We played it in band, called Of Sailors and Whales. This song is 17 minutes long, and it was by far my favorite song that we played in that class. It has 5 sections that depict different parts of Moby Dick, including Ishmael's intro, Queequeg, Father Maple, Ahab, and the White Whale. I did end up in that class getting spoiled for the ending of Moby Dick, which because I was thinking that In the Heart of the Sea was an adaptation for it, I was thinking that was how Moby Dick ended, not how Moby Dick actually ended. But I was still reminded, because of the song, how intrigued I was for the story of Moby Dick. And then the final push for why I ended up reading Moby Dick was because my roommate started reading it and I wanted to read it first. So there was that too. Okay, and then the other one small hiccup that I was kind of like, is the fact that because it is such a big book and it is considered one of like the harder classics, at least as far as what was on my radar, I was a little bit intimidated. But what I ended up doing, which was really worked, is there's this booktuber called Tristan and the Classics, and I randomly found his videos about the same time as I wanted to start Moby Dick, and so I followed. He has this little method that's really basic and simple. It's just reading 12 pages a day, and so I did that, which is, again, as simple as it sounds, just read 12 pages a day, no more or less. I followed that for most of the book, probably the first 3/4, and then I kind of cheated at the end and just read the end because I was close and I wanted to finish. So I highly recommend doing the 12 pages a day, especially if you have a big, intimidating book. Moby Dick starts off with Ishmael deciding to board a whaling ship. On this quest, he first meets Queequeg, and together they find the Pequod and negotiate a spot on board. Queequeg as a harpooner, and Ishmael just as a simple sailor. And then once they're aboard the Pequod, the journey begins. But as I read the book, you kind of come to realize that the story is not really about Ishmael. As the story continues, he takes less and less page time, screen time, and Captain Ahab kind of becomes the front. And as somebody who doesn't usually like first-person perspective, I really like that they did this, because it doesn't feel like first-person because they're really just describing other people, and they're kind of in the heads of other people. So even though it's technically first perspective, it doesn't feel like it, which I liked. And then I really just liked the style of narration where it was almost like first person. Throughout the book, Ahab, our one-legged monomaniac captain, leads the ship on a dangerous revenge quest to slay the white whale who was responsible for taking his leg and making him a peg leg. Ahab is such an interesting character who demonstrates just pride and the absolute folly of pride and ego and everything. But aside from him, not aside from him because he wasn't my favorite character, but if we ignore moving on from his existence, my favorite character was Mr. Starbuck, the first mate. He's the only character who doesn't get sucked into this revenge quest, and he realizes, hey, if we keep going at this, if we let your pride continue, it's going to be the death of us all. And just his perspective in the book was just really good. The scene, there's just one scene that just lives in my head rent free, and that's when he has to when he's deciding, when he's outside of Ahab's room, I think, and he's just deciding, he has this gun, and he's deciding, like, does he just try to take out Ahab or not? And then there's the other whole showdown, which ends with a great line that depicts, like, the book really well, which is just the Starbucks saying, "It's not me you have to worry about, but let Ahab beware Ahab." I just, I love the just the characters, man. But not even, like, in the way that I'm attached to them, just in the way that they're described and shown, and the way they interact, and the way they tell what the story is trying to tell all together. Honestly, though, like, it's like, I know a lot of people would probably find the book boring and all the side tangents and blah, 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 but I loved it. And yes, some parts for me were harder to get through. Reading, entire chapters about, like just the whaling ship and how it works and stuff, but his prose was an absolute delight to read, and it was just so well written that I didn't really mind those parts as much as, and then also just the whole only reading 12 pages a day made those really easy to get through. I loved the way Melville writes. Okay, one thing I did want to say, like, as a side tangent about, like, people finding things boring, is I found recently just that boring things become interesting if you let yourself care about it and get invested. Yeah, and I just have found myself getting, if you let yourself be curious, I think it becomes less boring. Namely, whales in this case. Okay, and then even though I knew the ending from the class, it didn't really spoil the book, considering nothing happened how I thought it was going to happen, and then the pacing of it I didn't think was going to happen, and was going to be how it happened. And just so many random side chapters, like the blacksmith's chapter, or the carpenter, when Queequeg got sick, etc. They just kind of live in my head rent-free now. So now, yeah, I've already said this in a couple of videos, but now I want to read more big, chunky classics, specifically Don Quixote, The Tale of Genji, The Brothers Karamazov is also on my list. So yeah, I will let you know how those goes. If I read them, maybe I'll also do reviews, maybe I won't, we'll see. But yeah.